Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining. My name is Colin McAllister. I'm the Technical Director here at Optimus Networks. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do before handing you over to Ashley Pilbeam for the main presentation. We're taking a look at the Meraki MX today and seeing how it combines cloud-managed next-generation security with SD WAN functionality. So let's quickly run through the agenda then. So we'll begin with an introduction to Optimus Networks, just to cover off really who we are, what we offer, and how we work in partnership with our customers. Then I'll hand you over to Ash for an introduction to the Meraki MX security appliance. Next, we'll move on to some of the benefits of cloud management, covering threat management and security, and some of the reasons why you might choose SD WAN over a more traditional MPLS-only approach, for example. Then it's on to demonstration. Ash will show us the Meraki dashboard, followed by an overview of the Meraki MX product range. The presentation and demo should only take about half an hour to 45 minutes, and we are keen to take any questions you might have, so feel free to use the WebEx Q&A window down at the bottom right there. So, a little bit about Optimus Networks then. We're a managed services provider. We specialize in networking, so that's local and wide area networking, network security, and more recently, connectivity to and within public cloud environments. We like to think Optimus is a little bit different in that we are owned and operated by network engineers, which really means from the top down, we understand networking in detail. And that really lets us focus on listening to your requirements and providing the right advice in the long term. We're not about just selling you kit and moving on. I've actually been an IT manager myself, so I'm well aware of the challenges you face and how difficult it can be to get the right advice and the right partnerships in place. We try as much as possible really to avoid the typical sales cycle, and instead we prefer that you speak to us directly and speak directly to our engineers. So do one thing, do it well. That message is really at the core of what we do. We're not interested in selling additional services or servers, storage, or backup solutions. Don't get me wrong, we understand the requirements for these things at a protocol level, but we believe that IT, especially networking, can be very complex. So we think a better approach is really to do what you know best, provide special advice on one particular area. In terms of support, that direct relationship we build with our customers does extend well beyond an initial installation or a project. We don't believe hiding our best engineers behind a help desk really, or an escalation process. We actively encourage direct contact with our senior engineers, and we try and position ourselves really as an extension of your team. We really do pride ourselves on offering a quick turnaround on things like changes and updates that fit in with your processes. We understand that people have their own internal change control processes and things, and we try not to get in the way of those. We do like to talk, we like to get involved, and we like to give advice where we can. New technology. So until recently, the networking industry hasn't really innovated much. Things have been fairly stagnant since the late 90s. But things have started to change over the past 3 to 4 years. Ideas like software-defined networking and network automation have really come a long way and kick-started a period of innovation recently. SD WAN in particular is an idea that's really gained some real traction, and you can see that if you take a look at the SD WAN marketplace right now. There's about 40 different vendors, each providing slightly different flavors of SD WAN. From an automation perspective, this is another thing we're starting to see, is centralized control by policy that really simplifies making changes across the entire network. We actually had a customer recently who run traditional Cisco routers across about 130 branch offices. They wanted to enable a guest wireless network, but the configuration on every device over time had become slightly different, which tends to happen. And manually changing each of those devices really would have been a monumental task and a project that most people would likely shelve. In the end, though, we were able to help them by writing some Python code that simulated what we would do manually on each of those 130 routers, and we actually brought them up to common standard. And building on that, we were then able to automate the changes required to enable the guest networks. Trouble is, coding really isn't in the skill set of most network engineers right now. That's changing, and the same applies to many service providers. The reason I mention that is, had they been using Meraki, the MX, for example, things would have been very, very different for them. And you're about to see how combining next generation security and SD WAN policies can really make a huge difference, not only in terms of the features and functionality, but in how you manage your network. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to Ash, and he's going to take you through a bit more about the MX.
Thank you very much, Colin, and good morning, everyone, and thank you again for joining. So yeah, as Colin kind of said, we want to have a bit of a chat this morning around what Meraki can do for us when it comes to things like SD WAN and security. So I guess to start that off, we kind of need to cover a little bit about what Meraki is and what Meraki does. Meraki as a company, obviously, is something that is now under Cisco. However, their sort of whole platform and product set basically focuses around cloud management. They initially came into the market with wireless access points quite some time ago, and that portfolio has now been extended. So everything that they do is entirely managed from their cloud data centers. So there's no kind of separation of different management platforms, different things, and that brings us quite a lot of benefits. So from a security perspective, one of the things that I regularly get asked when it comes to Meraki is, well, if all of this stuff is cloud managed and it's all in the cloud, what's happening to my data? So I just want to reiterate the fact that actually none of your corporate company data is actually being passed through the Meraki cloud. The cloud is there purely for management data, for monitoring, and the metadata that comes back from that from reporting, for reporting purposes. All of your actual user traffic and data still breaks out locally wherever you decide to break that out, depending on the equipment that you're running. To further that, those data centers that Meraki are running have an absolute ton of certifications and accreditations around things like PCI, ISO, and all the good stuff that you kind of expect from a effectively cloud-managed service provider. The benefit with cloud management obviously brings a lot of benefits in for reliability. That Meraki cloud, obviously the EU cloud particularly, has 3 data centers in completely different locations within Europe. So in the event that something incredibly catastrophic happens and one of those data centers does go down, first and foremost, because it's only management data that's going through the cloud, you're not going to lose any connectivity. Your users will still be able to use their network, the internet, etc., as they kind of always have done. But also, when that does fail, there are 2 other data centers to pick this stuff up completely seamlessly. You will just go to the other one without knowing when you're looking to go in through and manage stuff. That provides huge benefits of scalability. In terms of, if we just flip over to something like the wireless access point for a second, per organization, we're looking at the ability to scale somewhere around 10,000 access points per organization. I mean, that's a pretty huge amount because, again, cloud management, we're not having to worry about buying boxes on site to manage all this equipment. But that also brings benefits of future-proofing as well. Software, the likes of firmware and software updates, things are just going to happen automatically. Obviously, if there's going to be any interruptions to those, you can set schedules for when they happen. But that means that because everything is done from this cloud management platform, we can bring in new features one by one as and when they become ready. So we're not having to wait for specific, every 6 months or an update that includes lots of stuff that we aren't so worried about, but maybe one thing that we really want. As those features become ready, they'll be brought into the management platform without you having to do, in a lot of cases, without you having to actually do any hardware upgrades or software upgrades. So the MX particularly is Meraki's cloud-managed security platform. The MX is kind of seen as a sort of next-generation firewall as well as a router and provides all the features and functionality that we expect from that. So all of the things such as remote access VPN, site-to-site VPN, which actually is a key part of some of the SD WAN stuff that we're going to talk about, but also the enhanced security features that we're seeing in a lot of next-generation firewalls now. Things like IPS, malware protection, being able to control traffic to and from certain countries if that's a requirement for your business. From a networking perspective, all of our MXs have the ability to fail over to 3G, 4G networks. So that means, a huge reduction in risk when it comes to the likes of WAN outages and that sort of thing. But ultimately, it also provides routing functionality as well. So we do have the ability to be able to do the stuff that you expect from most branch routers. We can provide some functionality around OSPF. I know for a fact that there are things coming with regards to things like BGP as well. But some of the main points are that we have dual WAN connectivity on our MXs as well, which means, if we are looking at particularly some of the stuff we're going to look at in a little bit more detail, the ability to load balance those things, do high availability in the event of link failures, and intelligently control where some of that traffic goes, which kind of brings in the application control side of stuff. If any of you have been using any of the other Meraki products, particularly things like Wi-Fi, you'll know the capabilities that we've got around things like traffic shaping, being able to do content filtering based on URL categories and things like that, but also built-in control for quality of service, which when you're starting to run things like modern applications like voice and video, those things become incredibly important. So some of the reasons that people go for the Meraki MX, again, bear in mind that they are still part of Cisco. Meraki is part of Cisco now, which means actually those, excuse me, the features and functionality and new security technologies that Cisco are developing are also getting integrated within the Meraki MX. But without the hassle of the management overhead, there is no CLI through the entire Meraki portfolio. There is no command line access to any of the equipment. It is entirely GUI-based. Everything is designed to be fairly simple. And when we talk about scalability, we can actually start provisioning and configuring those devices within the Meraki cloud before they've even been delivered to the site. So that means the ability to start spinning up brand new sites fairly quickly and without the need to be sending, high-level engineers out to some of those sites in a lot of cases. We can also start doing clever things around templates so that we can ensure configuration is the same across all of our sites, something that Colin touched on earlier with one of the recent customers. Visibility as well, we can start looking at what users are doing when they're doing it, monitoring connectivity and all that sort of other stuff. And if you are using any other parts of the Meraki portfolio, the dashboard is identical. It's the same dashboard, so all of that will become one single pane of glass management potentially for all of your portfolio. Security made simple is what they're really going for with the Meraki MX. So we kind of touched on the stuff you expect from next generation firewalls, the ability to control things on an application basis rather than just port and protocol. A lot of those things, to a degree, when you're looking at IP port protocol type stuff, quite easy to get around if you really want to. When we've got visibility into the actual application and what it's doing, that then becomes a lot more difficult. Intrusion prevention, which is actually based on Cisco's Snort IPS, which is part of an acquisition from SourceWire a number of years ago. So industry-leading intrusion prevention is now built into the Meraki portfolio. We've got a huge amount of content filtering available, so the stuff you expect, blocking the likes of gambling sites and things like that during work time and within work networks. The ability to control stuff by country. Do you want your devices talking to certain countries? Are there any issues from a business perspective with doing that? You can start to control those. And Cisco's advanced malware protection is something that, as a whole, they've been pushing, and it's something that's available on the majority of the Cisco product portfolio now. The ability to do cloud-based malware scanning of files that are coming into your network and the ability to sandbox those files as part of that, again, something that's now being pulled into the Meraki MX. The likes of software and firmware updates, something we kind of already touched on to a degree, delivering those updates entirely from the cloud, not having to go around to each of your devices and start updating certain ones to certain levels at different time frames and all that sort of stuff. We can schedule each different network to a time zone within their country, if you're looking at a global network, to be able to get them to automatically upgrade outside of working hours for them without impacting business critical systems. And obviously, everything's backed by the likes of PCI compliance and as well as, quite a lot of other things around the ISO accreditations. One important thing to remember, again, going back to the Cisco part of this, the threat intelligence that we're seeing, whether it be Meraki and Cisco as a whole, is enormous compared to any other security vendor out there. I'm not going to start reading through some of the stats on here, but we are talking about an enormous amount of visibility of everything that's going on the internet, where the threats are coming from, being able to see brand new threats and stop them faster. That's what Cisco are pushing hugely at the moment, and all of that stuff is part of the back-end intelligence that's now running within the Meraki portfolio. So moving away from specifically the security side of things, what we're primarily here to focus on is software-defined WAN. So what is it? We're talking about an approach to network connectivity and WAN connectivity that is making things a lot simpler and lowering quite a lot of costs in a lot of organizations, particularly when we're talking about multi-site scenarios. A lot of you, almost certainly all of you, are going to be aware MPLS is expensive. So we want to be able to control that bandwidth. So applying policies based on what our link is. Are we talking about an MPLS circuit, an internet circuit, or even 3G, 4G? Setting profiles and policies based on that WAN link to be able to control our traffic, because we don't want to be sending everyone, YouTube, Netflix, and the like across our expensive MPLS connection, if that's what we're running, when in fact that's not business critical. That's going to cost us more money for something that effectively isn't relevant. So optimizing those applications using things like quality of service. We've also got traffic shaping capabilities in there to cap those certain applications and connectivity to certain sites and services at a certain level, so that we're reserving any bandwidth that we're actually going to need for business critical systems. And particularly, again, going back to things like voice and video, that's really important. Intelligent path control has the ability, because we have dual WAN and that failover capabilities, we're actually able to dynamically choose which link our traffic should be going over. We can start doing very, very clever things, setting thresholds and performance statistics, that we want for this type of traffic, and it will automatically get routed over the best link possible for that at that time. If we are looking at having things like an MPLS, a WAN circuit, the ability to then go, actually, all my corporate traffic goes this way and anything else goes out of the internet. But also, in the event that my MPLS obviously either goes down or becomes incredibly heavily utilized by various other applications, we can send certain other things out of other connections securely, so that we're not, so that the user experience at the end is basically the same. Things like site-to-site VPN are a huge part of this. If any of you have had the pleasure of configuring things like site-to-site VPNs between lots and lots of different sites past, it's often quite a headache. Meraki has made this very simple. We're talking about a few clicks to be able to set up either hub and spoke or full mesh VPNs within this solution. And again, everything's managed from one central dashboard. We're not talking about logging on to different devices and doing different things. That obviously gives us a huge amount of, potentially a huge amount of savings when it comes to things like MPLS. Yes, MPLS circuits are expensive, but they're there for reliability. However, this is giving us the ability to use lower cost internet WAN circuits, whether that be things like lease line fiber, or excuse me, if you're looking at possibly smaller sites that are using more basic connections, then by having two of those and being able to control where that traffic goes, you can effectively get an MPLS-like reliability throughout your entire environment without having those costs over, having to run those costs with an MPLS circuit. And it also means you're not tied to certain providers for certain links. One of the big things with some of the MPLS providers, unless you're with a very, very, very big MPLS provider, a lot of them don't have presence in certain areas. So this can come in real handy, particularly if you're talking global networks. And obviously off the back of that, again, going back into that deep visibility and control that we had for this, the ability to do high availability, hugely scalable, and most importantly, particularly in this day and age, do all this purely. So connections, sort of some of the examples of connection types that we can start to look at for things like this. Yes, if you do already have a big investment in MPLS, then we can start to look at what does that MPLS need to be used for. Realistically, that should be there for corporate traffic, business critical systems, that kind of thing. If we have the ability to then add a second broadband or fiber connection into that same office, we can then start to send the less important traffic over site-to-site VPN to our data center, rather than using the MPLS. So potential to start lowering those costs. In the event that we aren't looking at MPLS, we've got the option to just run dual broadband, whether that be something, that over here, something along the lines of a fiber to the cabinet type deployment, as well as a lease line. Again, controlling where that traffic goes, using the best link for that at the time. And obviously, in the event that we have a failover scenario where our broadband link goes down, we've got the ability to then fail that over to either 3G, 4G networks, depending on what's available, and then, again, set certain policies based on that, because when we start talking about using 3G, 4G, again, that data cost can rack up quite dramatically if you're going to be using it constantly. So we only really want to push and prioritize, again, corporate traffic over that network. So, covering off things like, dual uplinks. So all of the MX portfolio has the ability to run two physical uplink connections, and that's in addition to the USB modem support, which gives us a 3G, 4G connectivity. Like VPN, you can kind of see on some of the screenshots on here that we'll, again, have a look into shortly in the demo, the sorts of visibility and things that we're getting, looking at, intelligent path control based on what are our link utilizations looking like at the moment. Is this particular link busy? I know I'm supposed to prioritize this link, but actually you'll get a better user experience by using this one. So the ability to do very, very clever things like that. Kind of mentioned that we can integrate with existing OCS networks, and that we will soon have the ability to do that in a BGP scenario as well. All the appliances are also available to do high availability. So in the unlikely event that actually, for some reason your physical appliance does go down, whether that be power related or hardware issues, the ability to automatically fail over very, very quickly to a second device that's sat there. And obviously that traffic shaping capabilities that we really want to look at. Automated site-to-site VPN is kind of what underpins the whole sort of SD WAN side of things from Meraki's perspective. Creating site-to-site VPNs between multiple offices is very, very simple. We're going to do it quite quickly in a few clicks. Everything is managed through the same dashboard. So by telling Meraki, the dashboard, that you want to create a mesh VPN between all your sites, that is exactly what it will go away and do. So completely, fully automated, whether you want to do that as mesh or hub and spoke. And obviously you do then have the ability to connect things to non-Meraki site-to-site VPNs if that's still a requirement for your network. That obviously provides a lot of resiliency. So, we can change various things around based on, things like ISPs or data center outages and that kind of thing, being able to automatically then change the route of that traffic because we're controlling the VPN as a whole. So, just a little bit more on the application aware side of things. The ability not just to go, this IP on this port, being able to do set controls based on that. We're actually able to do things like, right, what do we do with Gmail, Dropbox, Netflix, the sort of stuff that's high bandwidth applications that we want to be able to provide more control over. We can do policy-based routing based on that. So actually, where do we want to send the traffic? Are we just going to break it out locally, straight out to the internet? Are we going to send it over a VPN connection? Or are we going to use our own MPLS for it? And in the event, things like Netflix and the likes of that, you're probably going to want to just chuck them straight out with no real priority. When we're talking about WebEx, again, the ability to control whether that is something you're prioritizing as an internal tool or not, and choose that. This comes in handy hugely for things like Office 365. I'm sure a lot of you that are using it are aware there are potential issues when you're using kind of proxy-based solutions and potentially MPLS sorts of scenarios with using Office 365, because actually you're being routed to places you don't need to be routed to. In reality, with Office 365, you want to be sent straight out to the internet so that you're connected to your fastest, quickest responding data center for your traffic. So, and again, to my knowledge, this is currently the only solution that will provide all of the SD WAN capabilities as well as that kind of industry-leading security and threat technologies that we've built into this Cisco. So we've also got the ability to do lots of very clever traffic monitoring, lots of analytics and things like that. So we can actually start seeing, again, something we'll drill into a little bit more detail on the dashboard, but the ability to see where all our traffic's going, who's using it. If you can see, read it on the screenshot on there at the moment, the top usage on there is actually software updates from Apple. If we're using all our bandwidth for software updates from Apple for people's iPhones and Macs and things like that, that's not necessarily business critical. We want to prioritize that traffic a lot less, but we can't do that until we know what that traffic's doing and how much of it we're seeing. So we can start highlighting where our traffic's going, who's using all our bandwidth, start drilling into the actual individual clients themselves, see actually are people spending their entire day sat on the likes of Facebook and YouTube when they should be doing some work. So from a productivity perspective, we've got the ability to do things like that. And then you quite easily limit those sort of problematic applications. I bring up, again, the things like Apple updates. Everyone knows that when Apple released an iOS update, particularly for things like iPhone, there's a mad rush for everyone to go to work and download it as soon as they physically can. That means that you've potentially got hundreds of devices trying to download the same thing from the same location and using up all of your bandwidth. So capping that, even just temporarily for those, those particular times when those updates are released, can be hugely helpful. There's an absolute ton of health monitoring, performance monitoring stuff in there as well from a VPN perspective. Obviously, again, underpinning all of this is the auto VPN technology. So we can start seeing what is our sort of latency and jitter across these links. Are we seeing any packet loss? And we can look at this from a completely live perspective, or we can then go back historically and look at this from a sort of the last month or so. So in the event that we are getting customers coming to us and saying, I tried to do a WebEx on this date at this time, and the link was, the experience was terrible. What was the issue? We can start looking at that. Were we experiencing any link issues at the time, or are we going to pass that back to someone to look at the actual endpoint of that? So we've kind of look at some of the features and functionality that we've got. So there's no real better way with Meraki to show this stuff off than actually have a look at the demo. Some of this, for some of you, may be quite familiar if you are using some of the other Meraki products at the moment, or even maybe the MX, but there's probably features and functionality in here that you maybe haven't looked at and maybe haven't seen. So first of all, here's a look at this organization that we have. In this particular case, we can see we've got 4 sites, so 2 data centers and 2 branches, just for simplicity's terms. And if I actually kind of expand this out, if I hover over these, I can see which one's which. Obviously, we've got 2 data centers, East and West US, in this particular instance, and 2 branch offices. If I expand this out, I can have a look at the connectivity stats for that particular site. So how many clients have I got on that site? How much usage is there? How much time has that connectivity been offline for? And also even down to, are there upgrades available for the firmware on these devices? Again, something that can be quite important. So to focus a little bit more, I suppose, on the monitoring side of things, and it's obviously a kind of demo environment and there isn't a huge amount going on, but you kind of see what we're able to see on this. We're able to see which devices are connected to this particular site. I'm looking at one of the branches at the moment, and again, this is a demo environment. There is only one client here. But I can expand out the applications that are being used and sorts of things, as you saw on the screenshot earlier. So, you know, we are likely to see things on here like YouTube, Facebook, Netflix, all of that sort of stuff. And then if we want to, we can drill into any of these particular ones and have a look where that traffic is coming from. So in this case, obviously, it's all coming from either the Meraki kit itself or from those PCs. If we jump into sort of specifically the MX side of things, got the ability to do quite a lot of sort of general monitoring based on just the appliance itself. So we can see what the active and standby WAN links are in this particular scenario. We can see over here which ports are physically connected. You know, we have an internal and 2 external ports available on this particular one. Those devices do scale up, which we'll kind of have a look into a little bit nearer the time, a little bit later in the presentation, sorry. Connectivity for the last day, well, what's that been doing for the last week? Let's have a look. And then we start seeing the connectivity for both WAN uplinks, particularly just for this particular site. If I start looking at the uplink details, I can see, you know, what those 2 connections are, the IP addressing that's related to those. And once it starts going through, we'll start to see live traffic data from this particular device. So this is what is going on right now in this particular scenario. Again, not a huge amount. We've actually got fairly, you know, reasonably level kind of latency and things like that. And then we can see what we're seeing from a packet loss perspective. And actually, for the last week, there's quite a lot on one of the WAN links. There is actually a reason for that in this particular environment, but this gives us a better idea. So what is our latency over time? Are we seeing peaks and troughs and things like that in the event that this happens? There's quite a lot of tools built into here as well. So, you know, the usual sorts of stuff you're expecting, we be able to ping from these appliances. We can actually step into reboot from here. We've got the ability to do throughput tests, which is literally just as simple as hitting the run button. We can actually see what our throughput is to the Meraki cloud, and therefore effectively what our internet connectivity throughput is, because the chances are that your internet connectivity is far lower than what Meraki's cloud throughput is. If we want to be clever and can't find a device, we can just flash the LEDs on it. You know, if you're on the phone to someone in a troubleshooting scenario, can you go and have a look for the devices flashing and, you know, whatever, and check cable connectivity to it. The usual stuff, being able to do things like DNS lookups and all that sort of stuff. Excuse me. So from a security perspective as well, there's actually, again, there isn't really a huge amount of when it comes to events in this particular instance, but we can start to see in the security center, we'll be able to see a centralized view of what's going on that network. VPN status is the key underpinning thing. It's what the slide was showing briefly earlier. Being able to see where all my traffic's going, how I'm connecting to it. We've got logs here for what's happening when VPNs are being brought up, when they're being torn down, and also any uplink decisions that are being made. So I can actually see on here, we're choosing WAN 1 for performance perspective pretty much constantly. However, because that, we are using the uplink that's best for voice in these particular scenarios. If we start to scroll down here, I'm sure at some point there will be a failover scenario. So to start doing, actually, we're preferring WAN 2 in these particular occasions because we've noticed that there's performance degradation. This is actually updating live data all the time, which is why when I find something, it disappears again somewhat quickly. But if we want to then drill a little bit further and have a look at what our peers are doing, so let's take a look at that connectivity then from the data center perspective. We've got the ability to, again, sort of hover over these things, and it will highlight the specific areas, where is all that traffic going to all these different sites. And that's quite a powerful tool to be able to see just from the dashboard, from your entire environment. So with the site-side VPN connectivity, something that I've kind of spoken about quite a lot, you can see on here how easy it is to be able to set those up. In this particular instance, we are doing a hub and spoke VPN. So obviously those two primary data centers are our two hubs. By default, this is off. Obviously, there's no site-to-site set up by default, and all we're doing is, we want this site, this new branch that we're setting up to be a spoke. Here are my two data centers, and I can prioritize those up or down, whichever one I choose. And which subnets are we actually going to send over to this VPN? Provided we leave everything else automatic, that is it. That will go away, set up those VPN connections to those sites, so that we've then got connectivity to both sites at all times. We scroll down a little bit further, we've got specific, excuse me, we've got the ability to actually set up site-to-site connections to other third parties as well, if that's something that we want to do. So in the instance that we're not using Meraki everywhere, we can still set up VPN connections to other sites. Traffic shaping is kind of the other sort of key part that we're looking at going through for this. So you can see pretty simple again throughout the whole dashboard, but let's set our WAN 1 and WAN 2 uplink speeds. So I know that WAN 1 is my 100 meg internet connection, and WAN 2 is my 20 meg MPLS connection. So we're going to base everything on that. We can then further drop that down if we want to start looking at cellular failover. Now, we've got the ability to put in servers at remote sites that we can then test for connectivity. So this is what is going to baseline our connectivity over those two VPN connections. We'll constantly test that connectivity across both sites using the various connectivity methods that we've set. And that allows us to then automatically choose which path is best for us at the time. So how do we do the uplink selection? Okay, so we've got set on here that WAN 2 is our primary uplink. We're not going to run any load balancing, but we have got that option. If you are just using two internet connections that are the same, we've got the ability to just hit enable them there, and it will just load balance all the traffic across both of those uplinks if that's what's required. But we can start setting some preferences based on that VPN traffic. So we can see on here that actually any traffic to this particular network, which is actually at one of our data centers, we're going to prefer this WAN link, which is WAN 2 in this instance, and we're only going to fail over in the event that we get poor performance. Now, performance is actually set based on some classes that are built in. Some of those for testing in the demo environment, but we've got specific ones set for VoIP and things like telepresence and stuff like that. And it's very easy to set up. So the other side of that is anything to this particular subnet that we've got, which we're assuming at this point is our voice over IP subnet. We're actually preferring whichever link is going to be best for VoIP. Now that's built in. We haven't had to define that. We're just choosing the best link for VoIP. So it doesn't matter which link's in use. We will always send it out as the best one, the one that's got best mean opinion score and jitter and things like that, and always push it over there. So some of the preferences that we've had set, like what we're defining as best effort, here is our maximum. This is the limit for this particular application. So obviously things like telepresence, we don't want a latency of more than 150 milliseconds. We don't want jitter of more than 40, and we certainly don't want packet loss of more than 10%. So that is our performance class. And obviously it's pretty easy to just add new ones and define them as needed. You can create specific traffic shaping rules based on some of the stuff we looked at earlier. So one of the things that I kind of brought up on there was Office 365. Let's create a specific rule to traffic shape Office 365. Now, in this particular instance, it's probably a good idea, considering that's business related, to ignore any bandwidth limitations that we've set on any other settings. Similarly, if we wanted to add something like Netflix in there, or generally just sort of, peer-to-peer or video stuff, I'm going to choose Amazon because it's right there. I can set a specific limit per client based on that, set the priority to low or high, and choose what we do from there. And that kind of covers off the sort of underpinning system as far as the SD WAN side of things goes. One thing I do want to jump into is actually some of the security settings and how easy some of those are as well. If any of you used things like intrusion prevention before and things like that, it can be quite difficult to set up. Meraki has simplified the whole process. Do we want to turn on IPS? Yes. What rule set do we want? Do we want to prefer connectivity or security, or have it as balance? We're going to leave it at balance. And that's it. We've now turned on IPS as soon as we hit save. Same for malware protection. We can turn on malware protection, and that's it. We're now checking files that we're seeing coming across the network, make sure that we're not putting in malicious content and people aren't downloading malicious files from websites and things like that. We can also whitelist certain destinations and certain file types if we choose, but that's it. We've now turned on IPS and malware protection on the Meraki MX in a couple of clicks. Content filtering, again, very much similar sort of concept. We've got the ability to choose what categories we want to filter. So the usual stuff that we're expecting to be on there, obviously things like gambling and things and that sort of stuff, usually the ones that we see being blocked, things like games potentially. And we can actually look up specific URLs if we want to. So if we put a URL in here, what category does that fall under, and therefore what do I need to block? Or if we want to look at it a little bit further, specifically what we want to block on a URL by URL basis. So I think that covers off from the demo perspective, particularly in the interest of time, what we're trying to achieve and how easy that is to achieve on the Meraki equipment. So there's just a couple more things to run through with regards to that. I wanted to have a look over the MX product portfolio and particularly the licensing model for this. The MX actually has 2 licenses available. As they kind of suggest, enterprise and advanced security. You can choose which one of those you want to use depending on what your requirements are. Obviously, if you're looking to do just the SD WAN capabilities that we've mostly been talking about, all of that auto VPN and routing and all that kind of stuff, It's all built into the standard enterprise license. We only need to then go up to advanced security if we want to start adding in those, as the name suggests, more advanced security features, things like the malware protection and the IPS, and actually the ability to do integration with Cisco's Threat Grid, which is the kind of dynamic sandboxing tool as well. As far as the portfolio goes, we've actually got lots of different types of platforms available, depending on where we're, the size and throughput that we're looking to do. We've got stuff for small offices that have the option built in Wi-Fi, things like the MX 5, through some of the kind of mid-range stuff, and also right up to some really quite powerful appliances, some of the brand new ones that have been released, the 250 and 450, providing up to 6 gig throughput. But one of the really nice new features that we've got the ability to do as of literally the last month or so is the ability to run a virtual version of that MX in AWS and Azure. So people are moving to those cloud-based sort of software as infrastructure as a service type platforms. We've got the ability to do that VPN and SD WAN capabilities within those environments. So we're not having to pay for the things like ExpressRoute when it comes to Azure, and having MPLS providers put in specific links for those things. So I think that's it from me, guys. Particularly, hope that's given you a pretty good overview. And at this point, I'm kind of going to hand back over to Colin to talk to you about some of the next steps that we've got.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ash. So this is really just some feedback we've had from a customer. Actually left on my LinkedIn profile there, so if you want to go and read the rest of it or connect with me, feel free. Yeah, so in terms of next steps, I would say it's worth pausing here just to say we've chosen to get behind the Meraki MX because we feel it's a great fit at a time where businesses are kind of in this hybrid state where some services are still hosted on premises, others like Office 365 or Salesforce, to give some examples, are they're moving into these cloud services. And really having the best of SD WAN and a full UTM security stack at the edge of your network really gives you a lot of flexibility, not only by leveraging the SD WAN connectivity features, but to get back to your data center, but by allowing you to apply that really rich security feature set at the edge of the branches as traffic is on its way out there. So moving on from the webinar, if you'd like to try Meraki for yourself, that's certainly something we can arrange. We can obviously arrange, a 30-day trial, or speak to us. We can come to you for a more in-depth consultation, or we could do a follow-up session on WebEx and really get to know what your requirements are and how the Meraki portfolio really fits in with you. So yeah, speak to us. In terms of the Amazon vouchers, we've taken a note of people who've been on the webinar, so we'll be in touch in the next day or two with you just to let you know if you've won or not, and to have a quick chat with you. So on to the Q&A. So we've got a few questions here. My contact details are there if you think of a question afterwards, which is most often the case. Do please pick up the phone or drop me an email. That's not a problem. First one is, how much does it cost? Well, really, you've got the typical networking answer there, unfortunately. It depends. It really depends on your requirements. What size of appliance do you need in terms of throughput and user count? Which license do you need? Really, to answer that question, I would say, let's talk about your network. Let's talk about what you want to do, and we can go off and come up with something for you. Next question is, what about integration with other equipment? So, as you'll have seen earlier in the presentation, Ashley mentioned things like OSPF, BGP support is coming soon. Really the Meraki supports industry standard protocols, so things like 802.1q VLAN tagging, that sort of thing. So there are options there for integration. This is first and foremost a network security device. So yeah, there's plenty you can do with it. Again, I will say, speak to us. Next couple of questions probably blend into one. So we've got, what makes Meraki different from any other number of security vendors and WAN providers out there. And the other question after that was, what are the advantages of the Meraki next generation firewall against the very popular Cisco ASA with firepower or Fortinet? Really, to answer that, I would say, you've got the things like central management, the ability to auto-deploy, the ability to push out policies remotely to more than one device at a time. It really helped differentiate the Meraki MX from more of the traditional firewall appliances. Again, I would say SD WAN's a big feature there. I don't know if you've got anything you'd like to add to that particular question, Ashley?
Yeah, actually, so quite an interesting question. It's one I get asked quite a lot, and a lot of it does come down to user requirements. But one thing I can speak a lot to is something along the lines of the ASA with firepower. That's another product that I deal quite heavily with. So from a functionality perspective, we're almost at a point where the two bits of kit are pretty much there or thereabouts with what their capabilities are. The difference is, do you want to have that simplicity and control and centralized management and control from the Meraki perspective, or yes, in reality, with the exception of SD WAN, from a security perspective, those features are built into the likes of Cisco's firepower stuff, but they're a lot more difficult to set up. They're a lot more difficult to configure, control. You're, again, slightly limited from a management perspective, especially when you look at something like the power of what Meraki can give you. And I think realistically the same would apply to Fortinet from that perspective.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much. Right, I think we're finished. Thanks again, everybody, for your time, and I hope to speak to you soon.